it's an ecstatic journey. It's always giving, always flowing. So that's how nature for me, from day one, when I opened my eyes, I embraced the sunshine, the water, the fire, and the earth and the ground I stood on, and will always be thankful and always will be wanting to give back to that creative force that gives life to each one of us.
Okay, life can be crazy. You're feeling like you're sinking, just trying to find a meaning. It's time for better thinking, yeah, better thinking. Time to tune in. Let's go.
Welcome back to Better Thinking. I'm Nesh Nikolic, and today's guest is Steve Zolezzi. He is a psychologist and has an incredible passion of using nature as a therapeutic aid. This is an absolutely fascinating conversation I've had with Steve. There's so many topics that we've covered, but something that's oozes out is really Steve's nature himself, rather than nature as that organic thing that we all live in. Looking at Steve and chatting with Steve and discussing concepts around nature with Steve, just it oozes who he is, the true embodiment of nature itself. Topics that we cover is outdoor learnings, what happens when we lose a deep sense of connectedness or a deeper belonging, spirituality, respecting nature, having a relationship with nature, the power of nature, what it can go out and teach us or invite us to learn, using symbolism for ourselves in therapy, and much, much, much more. One of my favourite ever podcasts. I sort of felt fairly emotional towards the end, and I'm sure you will as well. Steve is just a guy who oozes a calmness, a stillness, a place of mindfulness and groundedness. So, without further ado, here is Steve Zolezzi with his incredible insights. Enjoy.
Hi, Steve. Thanks for coming on board.
Thank you, Nesh. I'm very happy to be on board, and thanks for this opportunity.
You know what? This is something that I've really wanted to talk about because I have a bit of a passion in the outdoors myself. And who better to talk to on the podcast than yourself? Someone who, has that psychology background and is able to put two worlds together, the outdoors and psychology. So it's something that I thought is one of my passions, and I think it's got great applications. Probably one of the reasons why I love going, camping so much. So maybe we can just start from that space. What is it that you do in terms of bringing the outdoors, outdoor education, or from that therapeutic concept as well, being a psychologist? How do you blend those two worlds together? And then maybe I also can ask you, how did you get into this space? Because it's quite unique.
Yeah, well, in true nature of how I've always perceived the healing powers of nature, it was a natural progression. And I guess my core therapy over many decades has been working with adolescents and troubled youth. And anybody that works with young people is often find that within the confines of the normal therapy room, there's a certain resistance and agitation by teenagers in terms of comfort. So one has to be very skilled with teenagers to bring out true healing. And it wasn't long before I realized in the freedom of working mainly in schools that taking them for a walk outside the room seemed to yield comfort, but also better results for both parties, myself included. So I guess we're going back, Nesh, maybe 3 decades to where I started thinking about using nature in my therapy. It was a natural progression from my own days as a kid when I'm feeling mentally disturbed or stressed. I would just naturally walk out the door of the house and smell the roses and look at the dust and look at the trees and feel so much better. So like those seeds were planted. So fast forward into my role as a therapist. From day one, I always made sure I had a therapist chair looking out at the window, or has some indoor plants. And it seemed to me to make such a big difference in terms of my presence in the room. So the use of nature was always there in my background as a psychologist, therapist, and healer, and even as a parent. So as I evolved and matured as a therapist, and a large part of my work was, Nesh, was visiting schools across Greater Sydney, and most of the schools didn't have set therapeutic rooms because I was a visiting specialised psychologist, and we'd naturally go for walks in the playground or around the school, in the mini forests or the gardens, and I started feeling that the rapport was maintained very quickly and deeply with the young people, and I started thinking very, very clearly about how to translate and create intentional nature-based therapy interventions using ACT, positive psychology, and solutions-focused and narrative therapy. The more third-wave therapies seemed natural to be on, like walking mindfully and being in a natural setting. And where it really evolved, Nesh, was when I started having opportunities to work in schools that had outdoor education. I befriended many of the outdoor education teachers and heads of department, and allowed me to go with young people on excursions to mountains and beautiful ranges. And I've been to Everest with some young men. I've been to Cradle Mountain, and those settings have been fantastic therapeutic settings for staff. So, in a long-winded way, I have embraced in my work with adolescents, particularly in a schooling environment, the massive power of outdoor talking. I'm not necessarily happy with the word education, because it's not really education, it's outdoor healing. So that's been very much part of my life, integrating the therapeutic skills of a therapist with the natural feedback we get when walking and talking and sitting and being silent in nature.
Why do you prefer the word learning?
Learning is a feedback process that also involves growth and moving from a space of new perceptions and new feelings. So I like the word and lean towards learning more than education. Is a good word, but we've forgotten the roots are to bring out potential in the best. So our education, sometimes if you walk into institutions, it's still got the notion of organisation, goal setting, a more left brain sequential response. And those that work in nature work around complexity, spontaneity, and surprise. So I'm all about reinvigorating these notions, going back to, again, my beautiful childhood in Africa, where I lived in the forests and in the mountains on a daily basis, of awe and wonder and surprise, those forgotten values that need to enchant life again, particularly when at times that we feel disenfranchised and disconnected.
And Steve, what do you think it is about the outdoors that allows us to learn differently? I mean, you mentioned that as a early in your life and as a human being, there were times where if life was tough, you would go outside and I think use the word smell the roses and notice the dust and the like. Why the outdoors? What is it about the outdoors?
The outdoors is there unconditionally to receive you, and I would have learned from a very, very young age the beauty and tranquility of allowing myself to be embraced by its total receptivity of giving and in its simple beauty. So harking back to those wonderful memories in South Africa where my dad gave us opportunities to go to the game reserves and climb the mountains, we would have so many memorable moments of sharing the joys and landscapes and the wonder. And I think, Nesh, the outdoors and nature gives us a sense of perspective about how our life is in terms of just our own personal space, but the bigger space. We tend to get a bigger perspective and connection of life when we're sitting in the outdoors, exuding the beautiful smells, tastes, and sights of nature. And I think nature was always there before us, and gives us a sense of ancestral history and lineage. And there's an indigenous component to my work that's really the bedrock, a kind of medicine wheel approach where you're looking at all the directions and taking in multiple directions. So whether one is swimming in a sea or standing on a mountain, one is aware that there's many spaces below, above, and to the sides and behind and in front where we can see things differently and get feedback. So nature for me is embedded in the way I walk and talk. And what nature gives back is an understanding, coming back to my first observation, unconditional connection. And there is a creationist approach that nature gives us, that when one looks deeply into a tree or an animal or a pet or a plant or a stone and a sacred site, that the patterns are very much the same that we have in our lives. So we mirror in a micro perspective way what's happening in the big. And like one of the most amazing things, Nesh, is lying down on the ground and looking at the sky and seeing the stars and being grounded. Nature gives and energizes one. And just one small story is I remember going to Mount Kosciuszko with a bunch of 12 year 10 boys and hiking, and it was just myself and a lovely young ski instructor from Kosciuszko, a lady that we were toughing it out, walking 10, 15 k's a day, and the boys were all like big rugby blokes and tired. And spontaneously at night, when the sun went down and the stars came out, which the Sydney boys thought was awesome, they never really saw so many stars, she started reading Dr. Seuss books. And I just looked around and I saw these 16, 17-year-old boys lapping up the stories of nature, looking at the skies with this 21-year-old ski instructor girl, and how comforted and nurtured they felt. And I thought, wow, the blessings and power of nature. And every single night after that, we were there for 4 or 5 nights. The boy said, "Ma'am, when can we listen to Dr. Seuss under the stars?" And that's for me a very special healing moment that nature gives back to us endlessly and seamlessly. And it was all spontaneous and a surprise, but we were all open to those healing moments.
Do you mind sharing some of the learnings, the experiences that you maybe had as a young man? How nature, I suppose, impressed itself on you on a personal level? What was that thing that kind of you connected with so early?
I think nature, particularly coming from South Africa in the 60s and 70s, I suppose, let me not give my age away too much in terms of like when I was a teenager, but in the early 60s, we had access to lots of beautiful reserves and bushland around our home. And being in Africa, it was quite a violent, disturbed society at the time, in the full swing of apartheid and mayhem. And nature was the one space where I, as a white man, connected with my fellow African workers having some of the background is my dad was a mining engineer, so I'd been on many different mines. And my raw humanity would come out joining these African men on walks towards their mine shifts. And some of them would even hold my hand as a white boy. And we'd sing and dance. And this was very foreign to a lot of my white friends, the joining of different races in that society. But I would look at the Africans in their eyes, and there's a saying, Nesh, that is always close to mind, called Ubuntu, and Mandela would have used it, is to say, I see the humanity in you, disregarding your skin. So from that early age, it was planted in me that there's a common humanity that nature and the outdoors gives to you. I could not wait to meet these African workers on the end of the shift, because one other thing we had in common was a round little ball called football or soccer. And my dad was an Italian football player that gave us lots of practice time in the backyard to hone our skills. And I did impress the African workers on the way back with my footwork and dribbling skills. And they would bet little pieces of money on me that I'd be able to score more goals and kind of thing. So nature was an avenue of joy, belonging, and excitement. And that one part of me in a kind of war-torn, troubled society that gave me a sense of confidence in our raw humanity. And it was a gift, a spiritual gift. So a lot of my experiences, Nesh, have been very spiritual and deep in nature. And I was aware that I allowed this to transpire in my life because I had this sense of wonder and curiosity and awe and openness to the moment. Hence my passion and calling at an early age to help and mediate in a society and become a psychologist to try and heal. And then back then, one of my mentors was Archbishop Tutu, Desmond Tutu. His writings and work, and even Mandela himself. So nature was very much part of my background in terms of my dad being a mountaineer and a geologist, and going out and not just walking through nature, but stopping, listening, analysing, receiving, and take. So we'd come home from these walks, Nesh, and bring home lots and lots of dirty, so-called dirty rock and twigs. And my dad would say, because my dad was a mining engineer from gold mining and diamond mining, and say, look, from underneath the ground, there's dirty coal and dirty rock. But let me show you one thing. Look at the gold and look at the diamonds that come out under pressure. Nature teaches us that with pressure and with the right environment and caring, it comes out gold. So nature's taught me this kind of alchemical process of taking from the ground the dirt. And every single thing in nature is precious. The compost, the little bugs. So I was always prone to lie on the grass and check out the ants and find out where's the queen ant. And that curiosity has served me well in my therapeutic work, where I look and mine for gold. And hence, having founded Positive Psychology and ACT, it's all about mining the good and finding the resources and bringing them in and bringing out the brilliance and the spark. And nature every day talks to me about, I see your best, I see your goodness, I see your potential. Let's work together. We're all in it. It's a beautiful world. Let's share it. So it's, for me, it's an ecstatic journey. It's always giving, always flowing. So that's how nature for me, from day one, when I opened my eyes, I embraced the sunshine, the water, the fire, and the earth and the ground I stood on, and will always be thankful and always be wanting to give back to that creative force that gives life to each one of us.
Steve, you use the word spirituality and even the way that you speak, the language that you use is very much around connectedness, and being present with and appreciating different perspectives. I think you also mentioned about noticing the space above you and to the side of you and below you. Can you talk about this space that you're talking about, using that language of, spirituality or connectedness? Can you give us a little bit of insight as to how all those worlds sort of connect? Because, as a psychologist, we tend to steer away from that space, yet it so much oozes out of the way that you speak about the world. And nature itself. Can you maybe just try and talk that through a little bit?
The notion of spirituality is for me, and increasingly, encouragingly, more used in the workplace and in therapy. That the word spirit is basically our essence and true nature. And I feel like as we've evolved as so-called very clever and sophisticated Westerners and possibly some Easterners, so we shouldn't really try and fragment this, that we've forgotten this notion of deep connectedness. And again, I think one of our core difficulties in living, not just therapy, is at one point in time, we were all connected deeply in the so-called beautiful Garden of Eden. And for me, it's always very close to my presence and visual kind of imagination, the beautiful times that I've experienced, the Garden of Eden, and all great religions and spiritualities of the world. So I'm quite intentionally using the notion of spirituality divorced from, say, church-like or cathedral-type religion. Everybody understands that at essence, we are connected by spirit and belong in one big world. And there was a time, perhaps even in our early childhood, when we were in the womb of our nurturing mother, that we fully experienced, maybe unconsciously, this Edenic paradise. And we've always been wanting to recapture this enchanted, ecstatic rapture of actually fully belonging, not only to ourselves in our disassociated parts, but our environment. And we always try and play catch up and clever games, and this is again when the mind approach that's creeped into our Western civilization of rationalizing, analyzing, fragmenting, to see like where we can divorce the problem from the situation. It's caused us all sorts of problem. So the notion of spirituality is basically a key component to healing. So early in the day, coming back to my childhood experiences, I would befriend sangomas and medicine men, and you mentioned the medicine wheel as part of the spiritual approach. I was in touch with wise men, elders of mining communities, who would use the bones as a simple way to help heal and find wisdom amidst crisis. And I looked into the eyes of these sangomas and medicine men, and mostly women actually, that had these powers. They were African shamans. They taught me as a young white boy that spirit is in essence the first teaching of the world. And if we look to the four elements of nature that are in front of us free, sunshine, air, water, and ground, for food and natural food, that's all we need for true healing. So whether we go to these fancy universities and their doctorate titles and learn specific interventions, it's good to have those to satisfy one part of our clientele's need, but we do need more in our toolbox and within our souls, those natural powers of sunshine, exercise, outdoors, and appreciation. And for me, it's always been a curiosity that when somebody comes to see a psychologist, that the expectation is that you have a very smart degree and you know a lot about theory, when in essence your true healing as a therapist is how you blend in with nature and give away these elements of nature free. And I often just prescribe nothing more simpler than sunshine, mindful walking, pure water, and touching the earth to cure all illnesses, whether it's mental or spiritual. And it is in nature that one experiences this pure divinity and connectedness and oneness with life. And if we can model that, albeit in the therapy room, our joy and rapture for life, because we are healthy, we do live naturally, we do respect the environment, we can compound and add to that beauty by taking our clients and young people and old people that are in distress for a walk in nature, and they can embody and experience with every single step and breath the natural healing powers and become enchanted again with life. So the spirituality is not a part, it is the key component for me. And I'm encouraged, Nesh, that there was a point when talking spirituality and spirit was quite offensive in therapeutic circles in one way. And that's gradually changed because if you look in the last few months at the global situation, and more specifically in those of us with family and friends, they love walking in nature with their pets and the animals and going to the local park. Those are the healing spaces that people have now realized and taken for granted in our concrete world. So I'm just there about recapturing and redirecting people to that early essence and recovering that. So that the Garden of Eden, Nesh, in Canberra or Sydney, it's in the parkland just down the road, where I bump into my neighbour with his dog, and the little kids are playing with a frisbee, and the trees are waving to us, and the birds are chirping. That's the new therapeutic playground that we need to push and encourage our people in towards. Also as a communal responsibility, healing, I think. It's a wonderful time for people that are nature-based to stand up and say, look, our time is here. Nature's calling us, and we've given it a space to heal. And I'm listening to the callings, and hence I'm sitting here talking with you. I'm being very excited about it.
Steve, what happens when people lose that sense of spirit, that sense of connectedness, or deeper connectedness with the world, with nature, with others? The sunshine, the air, the ground. What happens to people, when they disconnect or focus on other spaces and forget to spend enough time, embracing and being with, that essence of the outdoors, nature, nature as it is, that unconditional, nurturing and inviting space.
There would be a time in most people's lives, Nesh, where one closes off for various reasons, not only to human connection, but to the outside world. And I feel that there's possibly, again, in terms of the principles of nature, there's cycles of planting and seeding and growing and nurturing and harvesting, and also rest. And those, for whatever reasons, that are closing themselves off from the light of the outdoors, are rearresting some form of rest and respite from a troubled world. And so be it. The very important element in taking a nature-based accepting approach, and I also use that word accepting intentionally, because nature is unconditionally accepting. It's a radical acceptance that the time will come when one needs to rest and be in the dark, and allow for that space. And I do know, like, your question was a very important one, and many of the young people that I've seen come in have closed themselves off from the world and physically do live in dark spaces and see the outside, whether it be nature or whatever, as quite foreign to the space they're in. And it's a gradual re-encountering and an understanding again of the deeper principles of nature, that a lot of creativity takes place in the womb of darkness, that there's always a connection. And there's that hope and understanding that in darkness, the sun will come through the next day. And again, the positive psychology kind of experiences that I've had with staff taking kids, there's always been 2 or 3 kids that have found nature to be challenging in terms of, like, both kind of their fragile nature and space they're in, that eventually, with walking together in the darkness, that darkness is therapeutic, because nature has got many sides that are invisible, that are truly therapeutic. So if you look at the wonderful tree, I'm just looking out the window now at this, there's an oak tree on that side, an oak tree on that side, that are my 2 friends. And they've been there forever with their dropping their acorns, and their roots go very deeply into the dark earth. And many of my most creative moments have been in dark, have been taking young people for a walk, just looking at the moon and holding, and there's many therapists that talk about the fruitfulness of the dark. So again, there's a sense of the wider sadness that we as a West, I'm tending to pick on the Western world, but it's our experience and where we're coming from, has divorced our connection with nature and ravaged and used it and pillaged it without paying the due respect of accepting its healing properties and working with it. So I see the multiple levels of an individual that seeks darkness because they've tended to buy in to this concept of separation and looking after oneself. And the ultimate fear is, by connecting back, one has to give oneself and show one's vulnerability. So what nature does teach us is, look at the trees. They grow crooked and they bend with the wind, but they're not judging and saying, am I looking beautiful? It's in the eyes of the perceiver and the beholder. So in its imperfection, nature is our best teacher of taking what's in front of us and using the situation and resources to then re-knot and rewind ourselves into a beautiful form that's still standing and holding ground. So I think this darkness component and choosing to disconnect with nature is just part of the cycle of life. And my role as therapist is to join in the journey. It's again, Nesh, the other connection I'm making is the hero's journey. That there's a time to set forth. Anybody joining us, Nesh, is taking a risky journey and showing vulnerability. And particularly in outdoors, it's expounded even more in terms in front of the adventure staff, that there's this raw setting out on a journey, and there's going to be challenges, but in the darkness of the forest, or the bottom of the lake, or the highest cave in the mountain, are the gifts, where time and time again I've seen the untapped resources and potentials of the most troubled youth come out, and staff would say, when we come back home to the so-called normal family or school, this kid is changed. I never believed they had this courage and confidence. And I would just wink at them and say, the power of nature, the power of a new setting, and the power of a new perspective. And the cycle of life again repeats itself, that you come home from the journey and expedition and adventure, and having found new allies and new friends, to get back to your community. And it starts again. So the beauty of the tree trunks having grown into beautiful branches with the fruit dropping off, and then the troubled youth becoming a leader when they get to year 11 or 12 and taking under his or her mentorship, again, the troubled youth on this expedition, for me, is the power and beauty of outdoor therapy seen to mirror the beauty and power of watching nature through the 4 seasons.
You said something about respecting nature, that there is almost like a relationship that needs to be built there. It's not just being in nature. It's about one's relationship, and one of those aspects is respect. Can you talk me through that a little bit?
I think we take for granted that the space that we arrive in to do our healing and therapy is one notion that I felt very strange in most therapeutic settings, in compounded, in psychiatric settings where one is institutionalized. So when I'm being slightly judgmental, or maybe not even slightly, is that sometimes we overlook that just the setting that we're in, with 4 walls and kind of very clinical, is quite foreign to many of our clients, never alone cross-culturally, but even amongst people of similar socioeconomic status. And even as we're talking right now, I'm very cognizant that you might be in Canberra and myself, not too far down the road in Sydney. There's land and sacred land between us, and even in between myself and the screen, I'm connecting with you. So the very first thing that a therapist and healer possibly should notice and be cognizant of is sacred space, in creating the intentionality of which ground are we in, and the healing. So my feet are very planted, very firmly grounded, yeah, and I'm cognizant of the sky, Mother Earth and Father Sky, and the East and the West, as a space of giving and talking and helping me and being relaxed with you in conversation and learning with you, Nesh. So when I am always in that space, and I'm also found quite curious the notion of the psychologist and the healer and the doctor, and I just downplay these roles, and I'm just somebody joining somebody as a friend or a mentor or a coach, more in terms of like that. So space also includes the preconceived notion of let's not just go to this expert and be cured and fixed. We're joining. We all need healing, including the ground and space around us. So this notion is quite radical, that the seeds are planted early in young people when they would see somebody like myself. That's fairly alternative in terms of psychology. But Nesh, we all have to play this game where we have to have a traditional hat for certain reasons to seem to appear professional and have the titles and use CBT and be effective. And there's a role for that, but it can be supplemented and complemented by a deeply rooted natural-based perspective that clients will see and feel, more importantly, feel. And I believe, coming back to the question of respect and responsibility, it's to the room and place we're in, the context. So we're living in Ku-ring-gai land and Gadigal land here in the special pocket of the North Shore of Sydney. And I've always been respectful in the start of my day or a conversation with you to pay my respect to the land and to the elders. And it brings to me joy, because once I get into that little ritual, I can feel, thank you, go ahead, you've been respectful, you do allow to have healing take space, and then I'm empowered by these ancestral spirits to go forth and play a role upon the land. And when people come visit, say like a retreat center that I've got, or a session that's in nature, we might have time to talk about how to create a nature-based setting. One can feel it's more circular and it's more group, and it's more shared. It's a different way of seeing your disturbance, and it's being respectful, and you can feel that the elements surrounding you in turn feel supportive. So allies and supporters and resources are very much not only lovely, kind people, but kind natural elements that surround us, including ancestral spirits and memories that go along with the whole notion of natural setting. And I believe a lot of our troubles pre-COVID, way back, have been created from disrespect of the actual value and notion of being connected to the land, and that impacts upon our whole well-being, not only individually but communally. And we really have to resurrect very, very quickly and intentionally our deep respect for Mother Earth and Gaia and the universe if we're going to go forth in 2021 with some sense of solidarity. And therapists play a very important role in contextualizing deep respect for land and landscape and ancestral spirituality.
If you don't mind, I'll take your invitation to move into that conversation around setting up a nature-based space. I know in strategic psychology, our clinic here, I spend a fair bit of time with our interior designers, trying to bring about an experience and a feel, and part of that was to have plants within the space, and although much advice was not to do so because of maintenance and difficulties with effectively caring for nurturing and the like. It was something that I felt was a must. We've put curtains in the room so that it does feel comfortable and soft, to try and move a little bit away from that clinical experience. The idea was at least to move a little bit closer towards a comfortable lounge type of setting. Certainly not nature, but more comfort enriched that way. Talk me through how you set up these environments. What is it that you are cognizant of and take advantage of?
I think the actual nature-based setting should be a natural and personal choice, and not contrived in a sense, because the thing is, those of us that are brought up and worked with teenagers, they will pick up inauthenticity very quickly. So my job as an adolescent therapist through the many years was to try and outthink the adolescent mind, and plant within them the power of nature in ways that evolve from them. So it's a bit of this Ericksonian trick, a hypnotic trick of utilizing their language and interest. So your question is a very exciting part of what I've experienced in very fulfilling ways of true healings. There's different dimensions and ways, starting from the more simpler one of entering the room and making the room mimic kind of nature, to the one where I've been very fortunate in the many schools that and principles that have allowed me to use the more complete and fuller notions of taking them fully outdoors, away from parents and technology. So we'll play along with those dimensions and any in between. And I'm very aware of your listeners, Nesh, that they're not always just going to be therapists and professionals. That there's people wear parents' hats and students, and so we're alluding to like more like the question, Nesh, is how can we make our environments and spaces more nature-friendly in ways that can facilitate better healings and connections between humans. And I feel like even if we as an example are having a 45 to 50 minute counseling session where you're feeling fairly depressed and just need some revitalizing, the first seed of a nature-based approach would be, listen, let's just meet at the fountains or the rose garden. I'll catch you there, and for 5 minutes we'll just walk around and hopefully it's not a rainy day and catch up, and then we'll go into my office, because one of the traps or things to be aware of, Nesh, is people don't always want to be seen to be with a psychologist, the stigma attached. So, but that's broken down increasingly over the years. So like, for the whatever, it's quite cool. So you get over that. So that already sets the stage for my experience is 99% of people enjoy that 5 minutes meeting in outdoors. It's respectful. Some actually don't want to go back into the white walled room. So can we keep on walking? So I've always loved schools with gardens and sacred spaces and kind of walkways, and even one step further, there's some places with labyrinths where you can talk about the journey going through and coming back home. That's more an advanced nature-based, I wouldn't say intervention, but walkabout. So the room of plants, and that is actually a very physical one too, because when one points towards a beautiful hanging plant, it's actually giving out oxygen to us and selflessly. So and pictures of dolphins and triggers certain memories. So some very, very lovely stories. Nesh is working with young people. I've had my own fair share of really troubled youth that didn't fit into the conforming classroom, and saw my space as a nice outlet and walks with me as a highlight of their days. But just tapping into their stories of kids, of their passions and their interests, which often psychologists avoid because we're too busy trying to find out dysfunctional thoughts or irrational behavior or whatever, is one of the more simplest ones. When have you been happiest in nature? When have you been? What's the most curious or most awesome thing that you've seen and experienced in your life? And that simple question has elicited an often a nature-based memory. And one of my most successful stories have been connecting with kids that were fishermen or agriculturists or permaculturists, or perhaps somebody that's worked in a nature reserve. And I can see the immediate shift of emotional response when they talk about their times fishing, climbing mountains, or creating gardening and swimming or surfing. And just that shift alone changes the narrative from one of being embroiled in a culture where they're not good enough and not accepted, to that one time when nature accepts me and allows me to be at my best. So the setting of in a normal clinical room can be enhanced by plants or nature-based pictures or sounds or herbs or kind of little stones there. So I used to bring into my room my favorite feathers and little, my dad taught us how to polish stones, and so I often have a little story about having there's pyrite gold, which is fool's gold. So I'd say to the kids would say, you must be a rich psychologist because you've got, I said, no, that's fool's gold. And that story alone would bring out, and kids would come there session upon session. I would be the fool and be wanting to entertained by their vast knowledge of the different fishes in the sea and the different types of bait they use and the different areas of expertise. So the roles would be inverted, quite rightfully so, of healer and person to be healed. Then I had started getting the notion of why am I so constrained in talking about healing, and in just these rooms when the kid would have to spend the other 95% of their time outside in a troubled home or in a troubled communal area. Got me thinking, well, I need to be more responsible and respectful of not just my 30 minutes, but talking to the teachers in the school as a community. Where does this kid fit in? So hence I started asking questions about my clients in the school. Where do you fit or belong in the sports team, in the singing, in the drama, any little pocket? I felt this is where the kids trying to find their place, their sacred place. So I would walk outside the boundaries of and confines of a formal office and talk to the teachers that connected with this kid and saying, well, how can we create this kid? So that's how my outer education began, more formally, saying to schools, well, let's take these kids to their passion, which is outdoors, and where they can learn from each other. And hence the notion based upon the medicine wheel of taking groups away and having a talking stick and a sacred circle at night and different rituals and respecting the land and stopping and pausing and talking to nature, and clearing one's negative thoughts in water. So embodying these teaching, which really one is unable to do in a normal therapeutic setting. But how wonderful it is to have enlightened staff, enlightened in the sense of staff that also love being in nature, taking the kids out and letting them camp together. And I can tell you, Nesh, that part of some of these outdoor education excursions involved a solo day. Now, if you think about a teenage kid that's used to being on social media for a long time and interacting with peers, they would balk at the thought of day 4 doing we'd call it an 8-hour solo, not a because that would be radical. And it came to day 4, where the kids were told no mobile phones, they were banned, just a notebook and pen, and you go and find your space, and wave to us to tell us where you are, more or less. We don't have 12 teenagers missing in parental mayhem, and we'd say you go out there at 9 o'clock in the morning and you come back at 4 o'clock in the evening, and then we'll sit around the campfire in a circle and share what we've all learned, myself and my colleagues included. I said, I found my place this morning. It's near the lake on a big rock. And off you go. And they begrudgingly went off. And who knows what was going through their teenage brain. But they all came back on time, very quiet, and sat around the campfire, and tears and stories, an absolute transition of identity that just flowed through from their time and learning about themselves, and the little stories they put in their journals was just so moving that they asked to have solo time for the next few days, to say, please, can we at least 4 or 5 times? We've never experienced. So the creation of silence, I call it the sacred S's: silence, stillness, and solitude. Those alone. So it ties in with your question earlier. When somebody seeks the dark, they just want some silence and solitude and stillness from a very rushed world where messages are conflicting. So again, the circle is complete now, Nesh, from your question, to move from a one-on-one clinical session where there's a place and a time to maybe regather the teachings, but the real teachings take place in the circle of life, around the directions. And I always use this notion of mindfulness in 4 directions. Whenever you're sitting talking to someone, I'm aware that up there's a father paternal voice. Below me, there's a maternal earth nurturing voice. To my side, there's a rational voice. To this side, there's an emotional voice. And if I take the whole circle in Gaia of the sitting, I'm being totally respectful to this person, because each one of us comes from one of these areas and corners. And the beauty of nature is it's inclusive of all forms of diversity. And in nature, naturally, one can experience and embody that and bring it back to the 4 walls of a troubled home or a troubled body, and say, I can do it because nature's taught me. Nature's been there much longer than I will or ever will be. And that's how one can spontaneously use nature. It'll teach you what's needed for each person on a long walk and a long journey. The gifts are in front of us. We just need to stop, listen, and pause, and show Ubuntu to those that decide to join us on this walk of healing.
That space of silence, solitude, and stillness is, I think, exactly what I connect with when I do go camping. I'm so excited in a couple of weeks' time, taking my daughter out, just she and myself, a bit of daddy-daughter time, but it's going to I think be very special moments, and part of the moments is I think we'll both be connecting with nature simultaneously together, whether we're collecting wood or looking for insects, or noticing the fog there in the morning, or the dew that's built up overnight. There's so many sort of aspects that's exciting, and there's nothing to do out there, which in so many ways is a strange sort of thing to say, when in so many ways we're also very active, but active in a present way rather than active in a mindless way. But something I just want to pick up on from what you said in terms of setting up a nature-based space. To me, it seems like part of what you do is that by virtue of you being respectful with nature and connecting with nature, that becomes nature itself. That becomes the conduit through which young people can connect, or at least begin to start to experience what it might look like to be connected. It seems like that that environment of complete respect and non-judgmental awareness is nature, is the space that you've embodied that, and part of it is actually to then go into nature, and or I suppose from the place where you've learned those or reflected in those areas. But so much of our clinical rooms could also be could capture that if we ourselves learned to connect, have that deeper connection with and respect for that space, that room, our place in the universe, so to speak.
Yeah, and it is magic, Nesh, to have that presence. I think the another word for nature is presence, and that therapeutic alliance. So the fact that you're taking your young girl away is very special. That in nature, basically it's free, and there's no expectations. But she's got daddy with her, and daddy embodies protection and nurturing. So you embodying for your little girl. She might not be that little, Nesh. I'm making an assumption here.
No,
but I remember,
right.
yeah. But I remember like not having the luxury of going to having camping gear. But my youngest girl now was a teacher. Our special time was to get a little tent for the backyard, and take the little teddy bears there, and that would be like the moment of presence. So you would embody as a loving presence those polarities within her, of male, female, dark, light, certainty, uncertainty, and the act by just being there in the campfire is very healing and therapeutic for any young person. It's kind of like what Bowlby in attachment theory would say, it's the holding environment. And nature is that. Nature is the first secure base where at least we've got that. So Daddy allows me to venture and go and collect the wood, and even the growls or the wolves or the sounds of the dangerous insects, whatever. Daddy will be there to protect me. And again, when one is in raw nature, one has to rely on fire to get the fire started. One has to rely on wood. One has to rely on water to put the fire out. One has to rely on water to cook a nice cup of cocoa or coffee. One needs the earth to lie on to feel refreshed. So in the rawness, Daddy and daughter are bonding with nature as a partner, restoring not only their relationship, but their balance with earth. So this whole circle of giving and generosity, which is true creation, comes alive and adds spark and depth. So when Mommy and when Daddy and daughter return home, they reinvigorate and revitalize the household with their renewed sense of life and awe and enchantment, and so on. So that the gift that we give within our normal home and campsite are mutually reinforcing. And this is the beauty and joy of seeing nature all around, because it's not only outside our walls, but inside our hearts and inside our homes. And this whole thing about feng shui, creating the home where there's a beautiful entrance and a place of nurturing and sacred space in the house, and could be the kitchen, whatever. It's very important, especially in times like this. If in lockdown, one point of hope could be is bring nature into your heart and soul of the mind. Even if you cannot get out to a bushland or parkland for the time being, your mind and imagination are so powerful that greenery and succulent joy and beautiful smells can come into the cells of your body, because we're all connected very deeply. And just by planting your feet, as I'm doing right now, on the ground, I can come in contact with the oak tree out there, even if there's a fence or barrier around us, and receive its beauty and joy. So I guess your question there is a very, very important one, is in small ways. I take it as a compliment, and thank you, Nesh, that you said I might himself embody nature, because that's the feedback I get, is the calming presence in the storm. When I guess coming back to something we touched upon early, why become a psychologist and a healer, and why choose outdoor education? I think there was a calling in a very wild society of, at least in my little space, being strong amidst the hurricane. In the eye of the hurricane, somebody has to sit and be calm. And I was called to be a mediator, to listen to all sides, to listen to white stories, to listen to black stories. So I did embody a deep calmness and gentleness amongst warring and violent factions. And my solace and strength has always been drawn from ancestral lineage and the wise elders of a society. And a very truism that, as I'm sitting here talking to you, is we all have that inner child of curiosity and awe that sometimes needs to be tamed. Then we have the wild adolescent, and then we have the house owner and the responsible. But we've forgotten in the West that there's two very, very important stages of healing we can give back to societies: that of the wise man and woman, and also the forest dweller, that's steeped in the old religions. And maybe it's a stage that I've evolved towards, but I believe I embody the wisdom of the years and help the young world and the young people know that there's always hope and healing in a society that's often fragmented and torn apart. And if you can sit in silence, without judgment and radical acceptance, and contain. So the contain is an important word coming from Winnicott and Bowlby. Contain their hurt. The Buddhist notion of breathing in suffering and giving out compassion is essential to the work we do. So I believe that if one has to put a therapeutic label, it would be mindful, acceptance, and compassion, the three big streams that I work with when anybody walks in: the awareness, mindful component, which is also Buddhist, the compassion, Christian component, and the accepting nature component. If we can draw upon those three important rays of sunlight in any situation, we will embody true healing and help people find their true natures.
You mentioned in our communication, in leading up to our conversation, our cup of tea together, that you're developing retreats, on bushland where therapy is, integrated or formalised somewhat. Can you talk us a little bit through what you have in mind, and when you think some of that might come into bloom?
Well, this is the exciting thing when one is open to new things and not constrained by having to do a normal 9 to 5 o'clock job in one's working life. So when one evolves to another stage where one has more freedom to tackle one's more adolescent childhood passions, these opportunities do come up and they spring in front of you. And I've got some very good friends up the coast in Newcastle, and specifically one very good friend that has a beautiful land. Her name is Monique, and she runs a group called Samsara Tribe and gather in circles. And I just happened to meet up with her, again, nature's calling, two like-minded spirits meeting. And we found the sacred land in Raymond Terrace, which has got a dam and beautiful trees and set in nature with peacocks and the wallabies tumbling in. And I felt this is an opportunity to actually use the land therapeutically. And it all came together, Nesh, this notion of just standing there, being in awe. And my childhood was relived in the moment I first saw the land. I saw this beautiful lake with a cabin with a little boat on it and beautiful trees. And I started shaking. And I said to Monique, why don't we just walk the land mindfully and see what the land gives? And the land was talking back to us about certain parts of the land which are more feminine and which are more masculine. And the middle of the land was more integrated, and the lake happened to be in the middle. So it was, again, how nature works in very special ways, that the land said, use us for walks and mindful retreats and healing and deep healing. And we did always respect the Warramie people of the land, first and foremost, who gave us these symbols. So as we walked the land, symbols jumped out, Nesh, from the land that were based on archetypal. So this is the Jungian influence. Carl Jung said, this is one of his lesser known quotes. Carl Jung said, you only need 3 things to really become a good healer. You don't need books, but you do need one set of books. It's called the Greek and Roman mythology books. You need the book of nature. And then, of course, you also need yourself, your higher self. And he said, if you can weave Greek symbols and Greek myths into nature, and then ultimately yourself and your body, you will be transcendent and invigorated. So you'll probably anticipate that a lot of my work is Jungian in terms of more like involvement. So part of my childhood was lapping up Greek and Roman mythology. I would be seeing these stories everywhere. And coming to Australia, there were many African myths that were very similar creation stories from the Bushman and Xhosa tribes to the Aboriginal people and the Native American. So the retreats were very exciting and a natural involvement where we'd sit and take people in groups walking the land and see what symbols they feel and which trees they're drawn towards, or whether it be water and there'd be a fire going, and walk around and people will find their space on land, and then we join around the campfire, and just that didn't have to create anything other than the imagination. Like one doesn't have to put a sword or a rose or whatever other symbol or a cave. People from whatever childhood memories or psychological space they're in, they've got their own symbols, like a mandala. So for instance, when I used to do my university exams, I would have a blue sapphire diamond, not real one, because they'd been stolen from me back in Johannesburg, in my pocket, and it gave me mental strength. So like again, it was this whole shamanistic use of symbols and archetypes and myths. So the retreat land is just a wonderful direct embodiment of true healing. And then we've drawn up oracle cards, so we call it the Oracle of Harmony. We've drawn up oracle cards that correspond to the 22 walks around. So this is the miracle. We decided to walk around without any preconceived notions about the symbols or the number, whatever, and just free-floated walk in the wilderness, our own little solo. And we joined back in the cabin, and lo and behold, we had 22 symbols each, unbeknownst to each other. This is what soulmates and connection does, and respect for the land. And it happened to be the tree of life from the Kabbalistic and Jewish origins. They tied in with the 22 major arcana of the tarot. And 22 symbols also envisaged the sacred feminine, the sacred masculine, and the harmonizing of the land was teaching us. So the land in front of us was teaching us how to use the symbols and archetypes in our own specific journeys. And it's been a wonderful journey, Nesh. Unintended, but life is full of surprises when it opens up to the beauty and respect for the land. So we've developed an Oracle of Harmony where people can come in and be in touch with these wonderful archetypes of the ancient times and use the healing in ways that are very specific for them. But one can also then use it through modern technology like we are doing now, through readings, through Zoom, whatever. And again, it comes back again to the circle of, it's not necessarily the cave or the water, the fire. It's our relation that we're giving to each other in respect that allows that particular symbol to give you at that point in time the healing powers that are needed. But one needs to be respectful of this ancient wisdom that you've been allowed as a gift to embody and treat it with responsibility. So one has to plant boundaries and ground rules in coming to sacred land, that we talk respectfully to each other, that we embrace silence and solidarity, that in vulnerability we hold each other. And those are all notions that themselves are true healing. But the land, just planting our feet on this holy land, which has been blessed with the Aboriginal people, gives us so much more healing, because it's the first healing, it's the first layer that we've forgotten about. We need to dig away all the dirt to see the diamonds underneath the ground. And these little walks around in retreats, we found miraculous healings, and we don't need to even call ourselves psychologists. We just guides taking people through, holding them by hand, and the beautiful stories being shared around. I'm sure when you go with your daughter, Nesh, when it's really quiet and silent, she's going to tell you some wonderful stories, which are to be really, embraced and put into your cardboard of memories for that time when she was 6-year-old and went on camp with Daddy. Because nature wants you to do that. It's calling you to show your vulnerabilities and humanness. Because when you're out there, Nesh, coming back to my days in Africa, nobody looked at me when I joined in with my fellow black mining friends. I was unconditionally accepted and loved, and we joined in Ubuntu. I knew that feeling that came down my spine, that this is the way we were meant to be. We've broken that knot of thread of connection by being superior and judgmental and judging and better than thou. And no better time than now for us to tear those walls of illusions down and embrace common humanity. So when you're lying in nature on the ground, watching the stars, we're all the same, man, woman, young, old. There's no boundaries. And the whispers of nature will say, so be it. We are all healed. We were never, ever unhealed. We were always connected. You have planted this connection, not me. And then we put ourselves to sleep and we go into that dream time and realize all the time that we were just dreaming. And when we wake up, we just need to remember that we were connected. And that's all that a good healer or a parent or a therapist does, is just remember that beautiful garden of paradise, that we were sitting there in that womb of beautiful nurturing motherhood. It will never ever be disturbed, because your true nature is connection and you belong to one and all. Never forget that.
I feel so much of that appreciation that you just spoke about. I'm in actual fact feel quite overwhelmed with emotion. I think that's that space that you're talking about, of deeper connectedness, and especially when you're talking about, you know, the moment to come camping with my daughter and putting those moments. I regularly talk with friends about creating moments is you know part of my maybe my natural journey, what I want to achieve, you know, making moments. And you just, you know, through your words, I like the word that you use as a guide. You just guided me to remembering that and reinforcing and making that even more special. And I'll certainly remember this conversation in a couple of weeks and really embrace that opportunity to connect as well. Wow, I could talk to you for. Usually, I would say to someone when there's a very interesting conversation, I could talk for hours, but I think I could talk for decades. You know, you truly, I would say, embody that space of you know, being wise and if I can say with the utmost respect, an elder in the way that you think and weave stories and create connectedness through your language to send I think a much more powerful story or begin a conversation. I know for myself, this conversation has been very powerful, and I'm sure the listeners are feeling much the same. I'm going to put in a little sneaky here at the end of our chat, another invitation to get you back at some stage. I would love to have you back and continue on with this conversation because I think you know, these are the stories and the understandings, particularly around, you know, this call to nature, which I think is more important than ever in our modern world. And I think as a species, we need to think more deeply about bringing those two worlds together again, rather than that fractured space of modernity and nature, but making them one rather than separate. So maybe that's something we can discuss at another time.
I really much look forward to that. I think, the cycle has now come enough, time to rest and be respectful, but I've really been appreciative of us connecting up. I think it's for me, it's been just a wonderful opportunity to talk my passion, but you've been a wonderful host in a sense of being a holding environment for me and allowing me the space, and I am deeply respectful of the opportunity to talk from this space, and wish you and your daughter and your family, but also your wider Better Thinking community well, and I send you and continually send you the joys and energies of the healing powers of nature, because they are free to give, and we are just conduits of this joyful power and presence. And I conclude by giving you an Ubuntu blessing, and saying that one thing that we've really done badly in the Western world is we've built up labels of differences on a daily basis. I'm taller than you, I'm stronger than you, I'm better skinned than you, I'm earning more money than you. And in essence, no. We are wonderful human beings joining in this wonderful world together, and we will make it a better place because we are in this together and we are one. Never forget that, and enjoy the ecstasy of the journey. So I will with pleasure be a servant and conduit to you and your audience whenever you feel the time is right. And thank you very much for this time. It's been totally, I don't know how much time has gone by, but it certainly has been one of those things of nature, is time flies by when you're having fun.
Certainly does. Thank you very much, Steve. And ladies and gentlemen, there you have it, Steve Zolezzi, incredible, wise and insightful, human being. And I hope you've enjoyed today's show. I certainly have.
Thank you all.
If you enjoyed this podcast, please support it by going to iTunes and putting a review, subscribe, share it via social media, and tell others about it. Start a conversation. It's listeners like you that make this able and possible, and why we bring in these guests to go out and share their knowledge and resources. And just lastly, if you are a psychologist and you want to go out and be part of a bigger team, develop your experience and get into some exciting work, come to strategicpsychology.com.au/careers and reach out. I'd love to hear from you.